this is what we were going to do in part in class today. And it's really looking at some basic materials. And when you get your curriculum, your textbook, whatever content area you're teaching, um, you have to figure out what you're going to teach. Sometimes goals are given to you, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you don't like the goals that there are, or sometimes those goals in the textbook don't perfectly align with what the district or the school wants. So you have to figure out how to change things. It also matters because you need to really understand what those goals are and what they're not, and then how to best assess them. Now we're really going to look at a three-step process for creating your learning goals or learning objectives and lesson assessments. We are just working at the lesson level right now. We're not going to worry about unit assessments. Those are a little bit different, just for each lesson. So the three basic steps are: one, to look at the content and see what you have makes total sense. Two, identify those main ideas and establish those goals. And three, determine how and how much to assess each goal. So if I look at the sample math material, and this is the stuff that you should be looking at, it's attached in the email, Understanding Division. And it's a 5-lesson unit. And the first lesson is really just about dividing with remainders. Now, you see that there is a new term, remainder. We will assume that students have just completed something with basic division. So they're already dividing. That's not really the skill you're introducing here. The whole idea that sometimes problems don't divide out equally and there's something left over is the main focus. If I look at the material, it starts with some counters. And one thing I need to note is that all these counters and all these problems down here that follow are always dealing with situations where there are no groupings into tens or hundreds or thousands or anything like that. Everything breaks down into ones. In other words, I will only have my answer as a single digit number with a remainder, maybe without a remainder sometimes, but I will never have a 2-digit quotient here, always 1 digit. This is important to note because if you put those problems right in the actual test itself, when you're trying to assess whether or not students can do this in class or after class, you're kind of going outside of this lesson. That's part of the content. So right now we're working with division problems that have a remainder and have a single digit quotient. I look to see that there is a visual representation. I have to decide, is that something that is really a learning goal or is that an instructional tool? Then I look to see that, well, sometimes I have them make a model. Sometimes I want them to make a model and solve again. And if you look at how these are really different, these are just getting a little more complicated, but there's no real difference between this and this. Here's division where you can use counters to practice. Again, this is just practice. It's not an actual assessment to see whether students can do it. And one thing I want you to know is that, right, if I'm looking at this, I'm never seeing them divide anything by 1 because that's kind of a waste of time at this point. So my divisors basically range between 2 and 9. I'm trying to see if they have any 9s here, but 9 is as high as they can go. I see some 8s, but the idea here is that one of the things that I'm assessing indirectly is that math at this point is a lot of kind of memorized facts. So I remember that 20 divided by 4 equals 5. I'm calling upon kind of my number sense, basic mathematical knowledge. I might be actively sorting things at some point, but if you remember those timetables and division facts and stuff that you did in high school, or grade school, I should say, not high school, where you got a sheet of like 100 problems and you had, 10 minutes to do as many as you could, something like that. Performance, unless you got 100%, was kind of spotty. Some people had a hard time with 6s and 7s. Dividing by 2s and 5s is really easy, and so on. And so I want to make sure that I'm sampling all of that stuff. And I want to make sure that my remainders vary enough so that my remainder isn't always 1 or isn't always 2. Otherwise, I'm not getting a full representation of the thing that I care about, namely whether they can divide with the remainder. Also notice that there are two word problems. So far I have visually represented problems, your basic division problem where I want them to make a model. I have some basic division where they just really need to solve it. And then I have some word problems. Here's some kind of more riddle that they have to figure out, but we'll get to that. This is not, I wouldn't say, a big part of the goal. Noticing errors might be a part of the goal. I have to ask myself, is this something that I just want them to practice as an instructional strategy, or is this something that I really want them to be able to do at the end? So in looking at this, I have a couple things, right, where I'm thinking of my goals. So looking at my content, I'm going to write my goals as 1. Students will be able to calculate the remainder in division problems that have single-digit quotients. That's the first one. I'm going to have to make this a little bit smaller so I have enough room. This too. My second goal is that students will be able to calculate the remainder in division word problems that have single-digit quotients. Now my third goal might be that students will be able to represent division problems with remainders visually or in a model. Now, if these are my 3 goals, then I need to start constructing my assessment. And this last question that I have here about how and how much to assess each goal really gets at this idea that, right, there are a lot of different problems I could give a student to assess whether or not they can do this. How many times do they need to do it for me to feel comfortable that I know whether they can do it or not, that I have a good, reliable estimate of what they can or can't do? Now, remembering that a lot of this is based on basic division problem, not necessarily the remainder thing, right? If I keep getting the division part wrong, my remainder part's going to be wrong. So I have to try to figure out, how do I tease out, do they get the remainder thing, but they just have hard times with division? Or are they good at division and don't get the remainder thing? Or both or neither, right? So as far as this goes, right, I can think about how many problems I want to do, making sure that I balance out my dividends, divisors, and quotients and remainders and have a variety of numbers, right? Because these are the only goals I'm assessing. I would probably feel comfortable between 8 and 10. I feel like that would give me a good estimate. When I look at word problems now, I have to ask myself, well, 1, these take longer. 2, it's a separate skill where you divide, or when you determine what you need and what you don't need. 3, I need to make sure that my writing level matches the grade level of the students, and not necessarily the grade level they're in, but what their reading level is at. So I want to keep simple sentences. I don't want to have a lot of extra information. I don't want that to get in the way. I know that they're going to take longer, and I know I'm going to be measuring reading ability as well. I'll want to use familiar examples so they aren't confused by what in the world I'm asking. And I'm going to go through a few samples that students last semester turned in and talk about common mistakes that people make when you're doing word problems. It seems so easy, but like everything we're going to do, we're going to find out that it's a little more complicated. And then there's the whole idea of students will be able to represent division problems with remainders visually or in a model. And again, how many times do they need to do this? For 2, because it takes more time, I'll probably have less. This, I can either have them make a model or I can give them a model and they can write the problem. So I can go either way. But I would think that actually this is a skill that I could probably assess in 2 to 4 problems. So as an example, here are some things that people have done in the past. Write the division fact for each given picture represents. Now this is a good idea in the sense that it's divided. However, there is no remainder. What should happen here is there should be an extra star outside of this one. So this one needs a star, needs a remainder. Same thing for this one. Right idea, but this is the whole point of representing things visually. So you can either do this, or you can give them a basic division problem and have them actually draw the picture. Now in this case, this individual has a whole bunch of problems here at first, that there's no remainder here, no remainder here, no remainder here. There is a remainder here, great. No remainder here. So as you are putting together your assessment, make sure that you are creating an answer key and that the answers make sense. So again, this is stuff that people submit to me to get at these learning goals in the past. I don't want you to make these same mistakes. This one has a remainder, that's good. No remainder, no remainder, no remainder, no remainder. So a whole bunch of these don't have remainders. I would probably keep 1 or 2 that don't have a remainder, just to make sure that they understand that there's not always going to be a remainder. You know, we did a whole bunch of even division before this, and now we're focusing on remainders, but then it's easy sometimes to start getting into the habit of thinking, well, there needs to be a remainder. So I have some with remainder 0. So these would need to be changed. The good thing about this set is that they do have a variety of different values. I would probably get rid of one of these 9s, turn it into a 3, right? Maybe if I'm looking at this, probably have 1 2 in there as well. They have 2 7s, they have a couple 6s, 5, and so on. So this is a better mix, right? I'd probably also want my numbers to be small. And if I was going to have them represent any of these as a picture, I would make sure that, right, if they have to draw little dots and things, I would make sure that this number is probably less than 20. I'd make it probably 15 at the most, because the more numbers, or the higher the number is, the more they're going to have to draw. So keep that in mind. Another format, right? Solve the problem and circle the quotient in the equation. Solve the problem and circle the dividend. Solve the problem and circle the divisor. These are getting at vocabulary, and it could work. It could all be done in one problem. And it doesn't target that vocabulary of remainder. Now, I don't even think we would need to have an item that specifically targets the word remainder, because it's used continually throughout the problems, where you're saying either circle the remainder, underline the remainder, or make sure to write the remainder. Now, as far as the word problems, right, here are, let me separate these out. Here are 3 different versions. First one says there are 56 students going on a field trip. There are only 6 vans to transport the students. How many students will ride in each van? Will there be enough space in the 6 vans for all the students? So in this case, right, seems like, yeah, that's a word problem, right? But when we think about it a little more closely, there's a problem in that I'm never told how many people each van holds. I'm told that there are 6 vans, but I'm being told to calculate how many students will ride in each van. Now, if I have, right, 6 vans and 56 students, well, some of those vans will have more people and some will have fewer, right? I can see that if I have 4 vans that have, well, how could I do this? I can have 48, 56, yeah. I'd have a couple with 10 and others with 9. Will there be enough space? I think so, but it depends on the capacity of each van. So there's problems with this particular thing because not enough information is provided, and it's actually getting a little complex. These are just supposed to be about calculating the remainders. Bill is sorting his baseball cards. He has 359 cards total. First, this number is too big, right? We need single-digit values. If he has 7 boxes and each box can hold between 48 and 52 cards, will he have any cards left over? If yes, how many cards will be left over? Again, too complicated. Don't give a range. This actually fits a different kind of problem we're going to get at, but it's not really complete. Here's one that is closer. It's the right idea in terms of the amount of information, but it's not actually doing the job. It says 6 friends went to the candy store and got 50 pieces of candy. How many pieces of candy does each person get? Again, in this case, people aren't getting equal number of candy, equal number of pieces of candy. This would have to be changed to include the idea that if each person got the same number of pieces, how many pieces of candy does each person get? And now I can start doing that. And I can also add the question, how many pieces are left over, right? And that works. Point being, right, that when I'm making an assessment, a lot of people think or just go through and say, I'll just make a bunch of questions, but they forget to refer back to the goals that they've developed. Now, in this case, again, when I'm thinking about how best, I would want to make sure that I have 8 to 12 of these problems with a variety of divisors, dividends, and quotients. For this one in word problems, I'd probably want 2 to 4, keeping the numbers simple and the reading level below that of my students. I don't want reading to get in the way. Finally, in this one, representing the division problems in a model, I'd want to make sure that remainders are included, use small numbers and familiar objects or shapes. I would probably have 2 to 4 of these, depending on how many items I had elsewhere. So this is the general process that we're going to go through. For Monday, I just want you to look at lessons 2 and 3 and do a couple things. One, I want you to figure out what the content is about, what the goals are, and then think about how would you assess it, how many, how much, what are the things to remember, and so on. The other thing I want you to focus on is how does lesson 1 lead to lesson 2, and how does lesson 2 lead to lesson 3? Typically, there is a progression that we're looking at across lessons, and we want to become aware that what we're doing in lesson 1 is setting up what's going to happen in lesson 2, and what we do in lesson 2 is setting up what's going to happen in lesson 3, and so on. It's usually how it goes. So those are the things I want you to think about. I will put in the email the exact things you need to do, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all on Monday. Have a great week.